He had it all. Julian Thorne, a billion-dollar empire, a supermodel on his arm, and a messy divorce he'd won in his rearview mirror. Tonight, he was dining at New York's most exclusive restaurant, a temple of power and wealth, to celebrate his absolute victory. But in a single moment, one glance across the crowded room froze his blood. It was his ex-wife, Elena, the woman he'd discarded, and she was visibly, undeniably pregnant. Sitting beside Damien Salvatore, the one man on earth Julian couldn't afford to call an enemy. This isn't a story about love. It's about what happens when a king realizes he's lost his heir to the man building a better kingdom. Julian Thorne didn't just walk into a room, he annexed it. Tonight the room was Aurelia, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a public number. You were invited or you were nobody. Julian was in every sense of the word somebody. The dark herringbone wood floors absorbed the sound of his Brioni suit. The Patek Philippe on his wrist, a Nautilus, was a subtle signal, $150,000, I don't need to try statement. Opposite him, Amelia Vance shimmered. She was 24, an eternity younger than his 42, and her beauty was as sharp and modern as his was established. She was the human equivalent of his high-rise penthouse, all glass sharp angles, and an incredible view. To the Odyssey Project, Julian said, raising his glass of Macallan 25. The amber liquid glowed, and to me for landing it. Amelia tilted her head, her blonde white hair catching the bespoke chandelier light. To us, Julian. You couldn't have navigated that gala without me. Senator Walsh loved me. Julian smirked. She was right. Amelia was his greatest recent acquisition, a social diplomat who had charmed regulators and politicians while he, the shark, circled beneath the water. He'd finalized the first phase contracts for the Odyssey project this afternoon, a massive, multi-billion-dollar green energy infrastructure deal that would make his company, Thorne Capital, practically untouchable. He had shed his old life to get here. His old life was Eleanor. Eleanor had been comfortable. She was grace intelligence and quiet strength. She was old-world classic, like a vintage Jaeger LeCoultre. But she was also safe. She wanted children. She wanted presents. She wanted him to be home. She didn't understand the hunt. In the end, her stability felt like an anchor, and he was a man who wanted to fly. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago. It was clean, brutal, and efficient. He'd given her the Hamptons house, and a settlement so large it was insulting, designed to say, "Thank you for your time, now disappear." He had Amelia, he had the deal, and he had his freedom. "Did you hear, darling?" Amelia purred, snapping him from his thoughts. "I'm thinking of Gestard for Christmas, or perhaps Moustique. We can finally be public, properly public. Whatever you want, sweetheart." He leaned in the scent of her perfume, Baccarat Rouge 540, filling his senses. This was the spoils of war. He signed the check, a figure that would have choked a lesser man, and stood. He was the king of this city. He felt the eyes of the room on him, a mixture of envy and respect. He turned to leave his hand on Amelia's lower back, a picture of power. And that is when he saw her. In the most coveted booth, the one he usually requested, the one tucked away in a private alcove of velvet and gold, sat Elena. It wasn't just seeing her. It was the complete system-shocking impossibility of the scene. Julian Thorne froze. His hand, which had been guiding Amelia, slipped from her silk dress. His breath hitched. It was a physical reaction, like a punch to the solar plexus. The ambient noise of Aurelia, the clinking of crystal, the murmur of 1%ers faded into a dull, high-pitched ringing. Elena wasn't the woman he'd left. The woman he'd left had been pale, strained, and thin, her eyes large, with the quiet betrayal of their final months. This Lena glowed. She was wearing a simple, elegant emerald green dress that bespoke old money, tailoring not the trendy disposable fashion he now favored. Her dark hair was pulled back, emphasizing the perfect structure of her face. But it was her body that held his gaze. She was pregnant. Not maybe pregnant. She was very pregnant. The swell of her belly was prominent, round and unmistakable under the soft fabric. A wave of possessive, primal rage washed over Julian. The timeline was tight. 6 months. She looked about 7 months along. The math scrambled his brain. They had been trying for years. It was the great unspoken failure of their marriage. The sterile appointments, the charts, the cold clinical procedures, the mounting frustration. It was one of the many cracks that he'd used as an excuse to find solace with Amelia. He had left. And she had gotten pregnant the next day. But the shock of the pregnancy was immediately eclipsed by the man sitting beside her. He wasn't just with a man. He was with Damien Salvatore. If Julian Thorne was new money, a titan of industry who had clawed his way up through hostile takeovers, Damien Salvatore was the son. He was old money. The Salvatore family owned half of Europe's shipping, and more recently, Damien had pivoted the family fortune into Ares Tech, a bleeding-edge technology firm that was the only real competitor to Thorne Capital's ambitions. Damien was the whisper to Julian's shout. While Julian's face was plastered on Forbes, Damien's was rarely seen. He was private ruthless and by all accounts brilliant. And he was looking at Eleanor, not like an acquisition, but like she was the only thing in the room. His hand was resting gently on her back. He laughed, a genuine relaxed sound that Julian had never heard in a business setting, and Eleanor laughed with him. She laughed. Julian, what is it?" Amelia's voice was a sharp, annoying needle. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have," Julian managed to say, his voice thick. "Oh my God." Amelia breathed, following his gaze. Her eyes widened, and her pretty face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered spite. "Is that her and she's—" Oh, how tacky. To be pregnant so soon. So desperate. But Julian wasn't listening. He was watching Damien Salvatore lean in and brush a stray piece of hair from Eleanor's face, a gesture of such casual, profound intimacy that it made Julian's blood boil. This wasn't just an ex-wife moving on. This was a statement. This was a hostile takeover of his past. He watched as Damien signaled for the check, and the restaurant's owner, the famed Jean-Pierre, rushed over himself. He helped a very pregnant Elena to her feet, his hand under her elbow. Damien was a usurper, in Julian's favorite booth, with Julian's wife, and Julian thought with a terrifying cold certainty that settled in his bones, with Julian's child. He had to know. He began to move. "Julian, no," Amelia hissed, grabbing his arm. "Don't, you look like a fool." He shook her off. "Stay here." He crossed the floor. The tables he passed seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere. The air grew colder. He reached the alcove just as Eleanor and Damien were turning to leave. Eleanor looked up, and her smile, the one that had been reserved for Damien, vanished. Her face went pale, then settled into a mask of cool, polite indifference. It was a look he hadn't seen in a decade. It was the look she gave to strangers. "Julian," she said. Her voice was steady. It didn't tremble. That more than anything enraged him. "Elena." His voice was a rasp. He couldn't tear his eyes from her belly. The silence in the alcove was a living thing. It was thick, heavy, and vibrating with unspoken history. Damien Salvatore, who was slightly taller than Julian, didn't flinch. He simply moved, placing himself almost imperceptibly between Julian and Eleanor. It was a subtle, powerful gesture of protection. His eyes, a clear, intelligent grey, were completely unreadable. "Julian Thorne," Damien said. His voice was smooth, cultured, with a faint European accent that Julian's bare-knuckle New York background instinctively distrusted. "Damien Salvatore. I don't believe we've been formally introduced, though I'm an admirer of your work on the Odyssey project." It was a perfect opening. It acknowledged Julian's power, established his own, and subtly reminded Julian that they were, in fact, rivals. "Salvatore." Julian nodded stiffly, his eyes still locked on Eleanor. He forced himself to look at her face. "You're... well. You look... well." "I am," Elena said simply. There was no apology in her voice, no justification. Amelia, unable to be left out, had slinked up behind Julian. "Elena, it's been ages. We were just celebrating. Julian landed the Odyssey project." "The whole thing. Isn't that wonderful?" Elena's gaze flicked to Amelia. It was brief, but it was devastating. She didn't acknowledge the younger woman's words, just her presence, with a slight, almost imperceptible dip of her chin before dismissing her entirely. Amelia flushed a splotchy, angry red. Julian couldn't hold it in. The question was a physical pressure in his chest. "You didn't waste any time, Elena." He gestured a crude, angry movement toward her stomach. The air temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Damien's hand, which had been on Elena's back, now rested on her arm. Elena held Julian's gaze. "Wasting time was what we were doing before. Julian, remember wasting years hoping you'd show up? I just decided to stop." "So you run to him?" Julian sneered, nodding at a multi-billionaire as if he were a common pool boy. "Julian, this is not the place," Elena said, her voice low and firm. "This is my place." Julian shot back, letting his voice rise. A nearby table went quiet. "This is my booth, and you're here with him." He spat the word, looking like that. "Like what, Julian?" Damien Salvatore spoke, his voice still terrifyingly calm. "Happy, healthy, loved." Julian's fists clenched. "That's my child." It was an accusation, not a question. The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Elena closed her eyes for a brief second. When she opened them, any trace of her old self, the woman who had once loved this man, was gone. She was now a stranger, armored and impenetrable. "No, Julian," she said, her voice cutting through the restaurant's hush. "This is my child. You have absolutely no claim on anything here." "I'll see about that," Julian threatened. "I'll have my lawyers." "You'll do nothing," Damien interrupted, stepping forward. He was now nose to nose with Julian. "You will not harass her. You will not threaten her. This evening is over. You are embarrassing yourself." To be told he was embarrassing himself by Damien Salvatore, of all people in Aurelia, was a humiliation Julian had never experienced. He was used to being the one who dismissed people. "Elena," Julian said, trying a different tack, pushing past Damien to appeal to her directly. "Elena, look at me. We tried for so long. This is ours. You can't just... take that. Take it." Her laugh was short and bitter. "You gave it away, Julian. You gave us away. For..." She glanced at Amelia. "For that. You signed the papers. You relinquished your rights to our marriage. You don't get to stand here in your new life and lay claim to my old one." She turned to Damien. "Darling, I'm tired. Can we please go home?" Home. The word was another knife. Damien put his hand on the small of her back. Of course. He passed Julian without another glance. He didn't need to. He had already won. Julian stood frozen as he watched them leave. He watched Damien Salvatore carefully guide his very pregnant ex-wife out of the restaurant, his hand possessively protectively on her. He watched the entire restaurant watching him. He had entered Aurelia a king. He was leaving it a court jester. Julian. Amelia's voice was timid now. Are we still going to Gstaad? He turned to her, his face a mask of thunder. He really saw her for the first time. She wasn't a prize. She was a liability. She was the cheap, flashy thing he'd traded his dynasty for. Get the car, he growled. Not a word. He was wrong. This wasn't over. This was war. The next 72 hours of Julian Thorne's life were a blur of cold fury and methodical obsession. He didn't go into the office. He locked himself in his penthouse, a sterile glass box overlooking Central Park, and shut out the world. He shut out Amelia, who he'd sent back to her own apartment in a black SUV with a curt, "I need to think." He shut out his board, his partners, and the congratulatory calls about the Odyssey Project. The Odyssey Project felt like ashes in his mouth. He did make one call, to a man named Mr. Flint. Mr. Flint didn't have an office. He didn't have a website. He was a fixer, a ghost who specialized in high-stakes corporate and personal intelligence. He was exorbitantly expensive and worth every penny. "I need everything," Julian barked into the secure phone, pacing his vast, empty living room. Damien Salvatore and Elena Hayes, that's her maiden name, when they met. Where they live, where they sleep, what they eat. I want to know what brand of toothpaste she uses. And the pregnancy. Everything. The timeline, Flint's gravelly voice replied. That's the core query. That's the core query, Julian confirmed. I want it yesterday. While Flint worked, Julian drank. He drank 18-year-old scotch and stared at the one picture of Eleanor he'd never bothered to throw away. It was from the Met Gala 3 years ago. She was in a custom Oscar de la Renta smiling at him. He had been bored that night. He had been texting a model in LA under the table. Now the memory made him sick. Not with guilt, but with a profound, gnawing sense of having been outplayed. He'd discarded a queen believing she was a pawn. Flint delivered the package 48 hours later. Not an email. A simple unmarked manila envelope delivered by a bonded courier to his private service elevator. Julian tore it open. It was all there. Photographs, timelines, bank statements, subject Elena Hayes. Divorce finalized June 14th. Met subject Damien Salvatore. Location the Save the Children Gala. Date June 28th, 2 weeks after the divorce. Julian's stomach clenched. She hadn't even waited. Or had Salvatore been waiting for her timeline? July Elena Hayes and Damien Salvatore are photographed in Sardinia on his yacht the Astria. August Elena Hayes moves out of the Hamptons property, sold and into Salvatore's private penthouse at 15 Central Park West. September 1st, OB-GYN appointment detected. Dr. Aramis at Mount Sinai. Flint was good. Estimated due date. Late March, early April. Julian did the math. He counted backward on his fingers, his billion-dollar brain suddenly reduced to basic arithmetic. If she was due in late March, she conceived in July, after the divorce. After she met Salvatore, the relief that swept through him was so profound it made him dizzy. It wasn't his. The humiliation, the rage, it all evaporated. It wasn't his. It was Salvatore's. She'd just been desperate, as Amelia said. She'd jumped from one billionaire to the next. He was free. The obsession had been for nothing. He was Julian Thorne. He had the Odyssey Project. He had Amelia. He had won. He poured another scotch, this one, celebratory. He laughed. He was about to call Amelia to book Gstaad. Then he saw the second thinner envelope at the bottom of the package. Subject Aries Tech Salvatore and the Odyssey Project. Julian frowned. He'd asked for personal. Why was Flint including business? He opened it. It contained one document, a heavily redacted, leaked internal memo from Ares Tech's R&D division. It was a progress report on a new proprietary battery technology, a solid-state hydrogen cell. Julian read it. His blood ran cold. He read it again. The technology described in this memo was impossible. It was at least 5 years ahead of anything on the market. It was the key to making the Odyssey project not just profitable but a true global utility. Thorn Capital's winning bid for the Odyssey project was based on existing lithium-ion technology. It was stable but inefficient. Damien Salvatore's Ares Tech had lost the bid. The analysts said it was because their proposal was too speculative. Julian looked at the memo. He looked at the date on it, June 10th, 4 days before his divorce was finalized. Salvatore hadn't lost the bid. He'd thrown it. He'd let Julian win the massive multi-billion-dollar infrastructure contract. He knew Julian would be over-leveraged, that he would be using last-generation technology, and Damien Salvatore was sitting on the next generation. Once Julian had built the entire infrastructure, the grid, the lines, the converters, Damien would swoop in, announce his revolutionary battery, and make Julian's entire multi-billion-dollar project obsolete before the first kilowatt of power was even sold. He wouldn't just be a competitor, he would be the only supplier of the one component that mattered. Julian would be holding billions in debt on a network of useless wires, and Damien Salvatore would own the power source. It was a corporate execution. And it was brilliant. Julian's world tilted. This wasn't about a woman. This wasn't a romance. This was a long con. Elena, her meeting, Damien, the pregnancy. It was all a distraction. It was a psychological operation. Salvatore hadn't just stolen his wife. He was using her as a weapon to cloud his judgment while he stole his company. But then a darker thought. He looked back at the first report. Gala on June 28th. OB-GYN appointment in September, estimating conception in July. Wait. Julian's mind flashed back. The last few months of their marriage, the sterile IVF clinics, the cold, impersonal nature of it, the samples they demanded, the last time he'd given a sample, the last hopeful one before he'd met Amelia, had been the first week of June, just before he'd told his lawyers to finalize the divorce. He had forgotten. He had told Eleanor to deal with it. He grabbed the secure phone, his hands shaking. He dialed Flint. Flint, the IVF clinic, a place called Genesis. I need to know what happened to the file. Already looked, Flint said. That's the part you're not going to like. Tell me. The file's active. The last withdrawal was made on June 30th. Julian stopped breathing. June 14th. Divorce finalized. June 28th. Elena meets Damien Salvatore. June 30th. Elena goes to the IVF clinic. Alone. The sample used, Julian choked out. The sample. Yours, Mr. Thorne, Flint said. Registered, catalogued and signed for by Ms. Hayes. It's 100% your biological child. The Scotch glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the Italian marble floor. It was his child. She had conceived it after the divorce, with his sperm, while she was with Damien Salvatore. Salvatore wasn't just stealing his company. He was letting his rival raise his biological heir. He was stealing Julian's legacy. This was no longer business. This was annihilation. Julian Thorne didn't just get angry. He weaponized. The revelation changed the board entirely. The shock and rage solidified into a diamond-hard point of strategy. He wasn't a man grieving a lost love. He was a king defending his bloodline. The child, his heir, was being held in the enemy's camp. This was a rescue mission. He didn't go to his lawyers. Not yet. This wasn't a legal battle. It was a psychological one. He needed to strike at the foundation of their new life. He needed to remind Elena who she was and what she had stolen. He found her. Flint's report had been thorough. 15 Central Park West. Damien Salvatore's fortress. Julian didn't call. He just showed up. The doorman, a man in a waistcoat, who looked like he could stop a bull, tried to block him. Mr. Thorne. "I'm sorry, sir, but Mr. Salvatore is not. I'm here to see Elena," Julian said, shouldering past him. The doorman moved to stop him, but Julian's eyes were murderous. "Touch me, and I'll buy this building by noon just to fire you. Call up. Tell her Julian Thorne is in her lobby." The man paled and made the call. A moment later, the elevator chimed its doors, opening directly into the lobby. It was waiting for him. He was being allowed in. The elevator opened directly into a sprawling 5,000-square-foot penthouse. It wasn't Julian's style. His was chrome and glass. This was warm. Bookshelves from floor to ceiling, a fireplace that was actually burning a scent of old wood, and something baking. It felt like a home. He hated it. Eleanor was standing by the massive windows overlooking the park. She was wearing a simple cashmere wrap, and seeing her in the light, she was even more radiant than she had been at Aurelia. She was alone. "You're trespassing, Julian," she said, not turning. "You're a thief." He shot back, his voice echoing in the vast room. She turned slowly. Her face was calm. "You're going to have to be more specific. You've accused me of many things. Wasting your time, not being ambitious enough, being boring. Thief is new. The baby." He strode into the center of the room. "The child. My child." Elena's hand went to her stomach, a protective gesture that was as old as time. "You gave up the right to call him that." "I gave up no such thing. You used me. After the divorce, you went to Genesis. You took what was mine." "What was ours?" She corrected her voice, rising for the first time. "What we made. What I was supposed to. What just throw it away because you found a newer, shinier object. You told me to deal with it. Julian. So I did. This child was the only part of our marriage that wasn't a lie. And what's this?" Julian sneered, gesturing around the opulent room. "What's Salvatore? Is he a lie too? Or is he just a convenient placeholder, a rich babysitter? He's a better man than you'll ever be," she said, her voice dropping a quiet venom in it. "He's a man who showed up. He's a man who sat with me through morning sickness, who held my hand during the amniocentesis. He's a man who reads to this baby every night. He is in every way that matters this child's father." "A father?" Julian laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Biology, Elena. That's all that matters. Legacy. Blood. This child is a thorn, and no Salvatore is going to raise him. I'm filing for custody. Full custody." Elena's face went white. "You wouldn't. Watch me. I'll drag you and him through every court in this state. I'll prove you're an unfit mother. I'll prove you're an accessory to a corporate criminal." "A corporate criminal?" she scoffed. "You're delusional." "Am I?" Julian was on a roll now. He was winning. The Odyssey project, the solid-state battery, Ares tech. He played a long con and he used you as his prize. You think he loves you? He's using you to get at me, and you were stupid enough to fall for it. He saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. He had hit a nerve. He moved closer. "He's using you, Elena. He let me win Odyssey so he could bankrupt me with his new tech. And he's using my son as the final psychological blow. Think about it. The timeline. He met you. He saved you. He orchestrated this entire thing. He's a monster. And you brought him to my child. Eleanor was shaking her head, tears welling in her eyes. No, he wouldn't. He did, Julian said, his voice softening, becoming almost conspiratorial. But it's not too late. You can fix this. Leave him. Come back. You and me, and our son. We can be a family. We can merge Thorn Capital and Ares Tech. We can rule everything. He had reached her. He put his hand on her arm. It's all I ever wanted, Julian, she whispered, looking up at him, the tears streaming down her face. A family. I know, he said, pulling her in. I know. I was a fool. He was about to kiss her. He had won. He had his wife, his child, and his enemy's greatest asset, all in one move. I take my hand off my fiancé Thorn. Now. The voice came from the doorway. Damien Salvatore stood there, a leather briefcase in one hand. He wasn't winded. He wasn't angry. He was completely, utterly still. He radiated an apex predator calm that was far more terrifying than Julian's hot rage. Elena ripped herself from Julian's grasp, her face a mask of shame and confusion. Damien, he said... I heard what he said, Damien said, walking calmly into the room. He placed his briefcase on a coffee table. He said I was using you. He said I was a monster. He said he wants to merge our companies. He looked at Julian. Are you that desperate? I'm here for my son. Julian spat his bravado, returning. You're a thief, Salvatore. You're trying to steal my legacy. Steal? Damien smiled. It was a cold, thin smile. You call this stealing. Let me tell you what stealing is, Julian. Stealing is what you're doing with the Odyssey project. Julian froze. What are you talking about? The Odyssey project, Damien said, is a front, a massive high-risk gamble. You're using Thorn Capital's pension funds, your own employees' money, as collateral for the Phase 2 loans. You've been cooking the books for 6 months to hide the leverage. You're not a king, Julian. You're a gambler who has pushed all his chips in, and you're praying the river card saves you. Julian's blood turned to ice. How? How could he know that only Julian and his CFO knew about the fund allocation? And as for my technology, Damien continued, the solid-state battery, that memo you're clinging to, it was a fake. I leaked it to you. I've been feeding your Mr. Flint information for months. Why? Julian whispered. Because I needed to know what you would do. I needed to see if you were a businessman or just a thug. And you, Julian, you're a thug. You went straight for the personal. You came here to terrorize a pregnant woman. Damien turned to Elena, his entire demeanor softening. He took her hands. Elena, my love, did you ever for 1 second doubt me? Elena looked at Julian, then back at Damien. He said the timeline. The timeline, Damien chuckled. The gala, Julian, I didn't meet Eleanor at the gala. I've known Eleanor for 15 years. We were at Harvard together. I was the one who introduced her to you. Julian's mind reeled. He searched his memory. A vague image. A Harvard friend. Someone she'd lost touch with. I was in love with her then, Damien said, not taking his eyes off Eleanor. I was a fool and I let her go. I watched you for a decade break her spirit. The night you met Amelia at the Conrad Gala, Elena called me, crying. I flew in from Singapore. I was the one who told her to finally leave you. He turned back to Julian. I didn't orchestrate this, Julian. I just showed up, like she said. But the baby, Julian stammered. Yes, the baby. Damien's face hardened. She went to the clinic. She told me she was going. She told me it was the last piece of her, and she was going to have this child with me, or without me. And I told her. Damien put his hand on Eleanor's stomach. I told her that a child deserves a father, and that I would be honored to be this child's father in every way that matters. I will adopt him. He will have my name. He will have my love. He will have my legacy. No. Julian was backing away. This was a nightmare. Yes, Damien said. You want to sue for custody, Julian, please. Try. Bring your cooked books and your pension fund theft into a family court. See who they award custody to. See what the SEC does. Damien picked up his briefcase. You have no power here, Julian. You have no legacy. You're an empty suit. Now get out of my home. Julian stood there, shattered. He had come in with a paternity weapon, and the weapon had exploded in his own hands. He looked at Eleanor. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Damien, her eyes filled with an adoration he now realized had never been for him. He was the ghost. He was the one who was trespassing. He turned, and for the first time in his life, Julian Thorne retreated. Retreat for Julian was simply a strategic repositioning. He left Damien's penthouse, but the fight was far from over. The humiliation had burned away his shock, leaving behind a cold, desolate landscape of pure, unadulterated rage. He had been played. From the beginning, Damien and Elena Harvard, sweethearts, apparently had conspired to ruin him. They had used his own child, his blood, as the ultimate weapon of revenge. The story about Ares Tech and the fake memo. He wasn't sure what to believe. But the accusation about his finances, that was real. And Damien knew. Julian was no longer fighting for a legacy. He was fighting for his life. He returned to his penthouse and made 2 calls. The first was to his legal team. I want to file for paternity and full custody, he barked. I don't care what it costs. We claim the mother is unstable, that she conspired with a business rival to defraud me. We'll use the IVF. We'll say she stole genetic material. I want her painted as a scorned, hysterical woman and Salvatore as a predator. Julian, his lawyer, a man named Sterling, cautioned. That's scorched earth. In family court, that can backfire. This is scorched earth, Sterling. Burn it all. The second call was to a darker contact. Not Flint, who was clearly compromised, but to a specialist in opposition research. I don't care if it's true, Julian ordered. I want stories planted. Ares Tech's green technology. I want it linked to toxic waste in a third world country. Damien Salvatore. I want rumors of insider trading. I want the SEC sniffing around him, not me. He was now fighting a war on 2 fronts, the personal and the professional, while his lawyers drowned Elena in a sea of motions and affidavits. His PR Black Ops team went to work on Salvatore. He liquidated a rainy day fund, moving $100 million in offshore accounts to finance the assault. He also had to deal with the Amelia problem. She was waiting for him at his penthouse, having finally been let in. She was wearing a red dress, but her face was pale with anxiety. Julian, thank God, she breathed, rushing to him. People are saying things. My agent called. He said there's a rumor that Thorne Capital is in trouble. And Gstad is. Well, the press is everywhere. Is it true about your ex-wife? Julian looked at her, and all he felt was irritation. She was a child, a bauble. She didn't understand the scale of the game being played. Amelia, I'm busy, he said, walking past her to the bar. Busy, Julian. I've been by your side. I've been your partner. You promised me. I promised you a good time, Julian said, pouring a brandy. And you've had it. Right now I'm in a war. You're not built for war. The color drained from her face, replaced by a flush of anger. Not built for it. I'm the one who charmed Senator Walsh. I'm the one who got you the meeting for Odyssey. You used me. We used each other, darling. That was the arrangement. No, she said, her voice shaking. I thought you loved me. Julian laughed, a real, genuine laugh. Love you? Oh, Amelia. Don't be naive. You were a transaction, and frankly, the deal is closed. He turned his back on her. He expected tears. He expected her to slam the door. He didn't expect the click of a phone's record button. He spun around. Amelia was holding her iPhone, her hand steady, her eyes glittering with a coldness he had never seen before. "That's all I needed," she said. "What is that?" Julian growled, advancing on her. "Give me the phone." "No," she said, backing away. "You think I'm stupid. You think I'm just a bauble. I've been with you for a year, Julian. I've listened to your calls. I've seen the real ledgers, the ones you keep in the safe behind the Matisse." Julian stopped dead. The pension fund collateral, the offshore accounts, the rainy day fund you just liquidated to attack Damien Salvatore. She continued, a bitter smile on her face. "You didn't close this deal, Julian. You just defaulted." You wouldn't," he whispered. "You'd be implicated. It's suicide." "It's a life raft," Amelia corrected. "I'm not a bauble. I'm an accomplice, and I'm not going down with your ship. You think Elena is your enemy. You haven't even begun to see what a scorned woman can do." She held up the phone. "This recording, you were a transaction. I'm in a war. Plus the other recordings I've made over the last 6 months. I think the Wall Street Journal will find them fascinating. Or maybe Damien Salvatore will." Damien? Julian looked at the woman he had so casually dismissed. He had seen her as a distraction, a simple, pretty thing. He had been so focused on the threat from Eleanor and Damien that he had ignored the viper he'd brought into his own bed. He had built a gilded cage for everyone in his life, and he'd just handed the key to the one person he'd underestimated the most. "Amelia, wait," he said, his voice pleading for the first time in his life. Let's talk about this. What do you want, money, Mustik? It's yours." Amelia smiled, a brilliant, terrible smile. "What do I want, Julian? I want what Elena has. I want everything." She walked to the elevator, her hips swaying, and pressed the button. "You know," she said, as the doors opened, "I was never really interested in Gstad. I was just interested in what it took to get there. And I think I just got it." The doors closed, leaving Julian Thorne alone in his penthouse, the silence of the room suddenly deafening. He was being attacked on all sides. His ex-wife and her new lover had his heir. His mistress had his secrets. He ran to the safe behind the Matisse. He spun the dial, his hands fumbling. He pulled it open. The ledgers were gone. Of course they were. The phone rang. It was his lawyer, Sterling. "Julian, we have a problem. A real problem. The SEC just froze your primary trading accounts, and the Wall Street Journal is on line 1. Julian sank to his knees. The war wasn't on 2 fronts. It was a 360-degree ambush, and the final shot hadn't come from his rival or his ex-wife. It had come from the bauble he'd so foolishly discarded. The collapse was not a gradual erosion. It was a detonation. It began not with a whisper, but with the screaming digital siren of his entire life, unwinding at once. Julian was in his penthouse, the sky-high fortress that now felt like a glass prison, when his personal lawyer, Sterling, called. "Julian, it's over." Sterling's voice was thin, stripped of its usual bravado. It wasn't a leak, it was a formal proffer. Amelia Vance. She walked into the SEI's New York office this morning with her attorney and... Julian, she had everything. The real ledgers, the offshore account numbers, the pension fund transfers. They've granted her full transactional immunity in exchange for her testimony. Testimony. Julian barked, a cold sweat breaking on his brow. She's an accessory. She's a witness, Julian Sterling shot back. She's the witness who's burning you to the ground to save herself. The U.S. Marshals are en route to your office. The SEC has filed an emergency injunction. They're freezing everything. Thorn Capital, your personal accounts, your homes, your cars. As of now, you are financially paralyzed. Before Julian could even process the word paralyzed, his other line lit up. It was the Wall Street Journal. He stared at the name, uncomprehending. He picked it up. Mr. Thorn, a crisp young voice said. Sam Abernathy, Wall Street Journal. We're running a story in 1 hour detailing allegations of massive systematic fraud regarding the Thorn Capital Pension Fund and its leveraging for the Odyssey project. We have confirmed the SEC is executing a freeze. Would you care to comment? You, Julian's voice was a low growl. You print 1 word of that libel, and I will buy your entire paper, just to fire you and everyone you've ever met. There was a cold, pitying pause on the other end. With what, Mr. Thorn? According to our sources, you don't have the funds to buy a cup of coffee. The story runs in 59 minutes. The line clicked. Click. The sound of the hang-up was the loudest sound he had ever heard. It was the sound of his world ending. He was in a single moment erased. He was staring at the dead phone when his Patek Philippe, the one asset they hadn't yet pried from his wrist, buzzed. It was a page 6 alert, a frivolous piece of digital trash he'd subscribed to for amusement. Spotted tech mogul, Damien Salvatore, and pregnant ex-socialite Elena Hayes ex-Thorn rushing into Mount Sinai's private maternity wing. Is baby Salvatore on the way? The room, which had been spinning, suddenly snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. The SEC, the journal, the fraud, all of it in an instant became meaningless noise. It was static. The real event, the only thing that had ever truly mattered, his legacy. His blood, his air, was happening right now. He ran. He didn't grab a coat. He didn't call a driver. He sprinted to his private elevator, his mind a white-hot scream. My son. My son. My son. The doorman in the lobby, a man Julian had never bothered to learn the name of, saw his boss disheveled, wild-eyed, and emanating pure terror, and simply looked away. The news was already out. Julian burst onto the street, trying to summon his Maybach. It didn't come. He ran to the private garage. It was sealed. A single stark white notice was pasted to the steel door. Property seized by the U.S. Marshal Service. He was a king with no kingdom, a man with $1 billion name who had no car. He stumbled onto Central Park West and did the most humiliating foreign thing he could imagine. He stuck out his hand and hailed a yellow taxi. The driver, glancing at his manic, unshaven face in the rearview mirror, had the radio on. A news anchor was saying, Thorn Capital in a stunning fall from grace. Mount Sinai. Julian growled, his voice a rasp. Private maternity, now. The driver looked again. Hey, pal, you that Thorn guy. Just drive. Julian roared. The hospital wing had his name on it, the Thorn Family Perinatal Center. The irony was a physical sickness, a coppery taste in his mouth. He had built this place in his own honor, and now he was crawling into it like a beggar. He slammed through the doors and confronted the nurse at the welcome desk. Elena Hayes, he panted, gripping the marble countertop. I'm Julian Thorn. The nurse, a woman with kind eyes and an immovable will, typed his name. Her expression didn't change. I'm sorry, Mr. Thorn. I don't have you on the approved visitor list. The approved list. His voice cracked, echoing in the quiet, opulent hall. I'm the father. I paid for this wing. Sir, I understand you're upset. But Ms. Hayes's birth plan is a legally binding document. Only Mr. Salvatore is permitted in the delivery suite and recovery. I am the biological father, he yelled, slamming his fist on the desk. You get a doctor. You get me in that room. Sir, I'm going to have to call security. That won't be necessary, Karen. The voice came from the hallway. It was Damien Salvatore. But this was not the Damien from the restaurant. This was not the apex predator from the penthouse. This Damien was in pale blue scrubs, his hair matted to his forehead, with sweat. His eyes red-rimmed and hollow, with a terror Julian recognized instantly. It was the terror of total powerlessness. Julian, he said. The name was flat, exhausted. Where is she? Julian demanded, moving toward him. Where is my son? Damien's face tightened, but he didn't move. She's in surgery, he said, and his voice cracked just once. An emergency C-section. The baby's heart rate was dropping. The cord it's wrapped. He looked at Julian, and for one singular agonizing moment, the rivalry evaporated. They were just two men staring at a closed steel door. Is he? Julian couldn't finish the question. We don't know, Damien whispered. They've been in there for 40 minutes. They don't know. The two men stood in the sterile white corridor, the king and the kingslayer. All the money, all the power, all the anger. It was all useless. They were just two men waiting for a doctor to come through a door. Time became elastic. Julian's Patek, $150,000 monument to precision, seemed to mock him, its second hand ticking with an agonizing, slow rhythm. He paced. Damien stood his back against the wall, staring at the red, in-surgery light, as if he could change it with his gaze. Amelia. Julian found himself saying the words, tasting like ash. She went to the SEC. She had it all. Damien looked at him, his eyes dead. I know. My board has been calling all morning, worried about market contagion from your collapse. He said it not as a taunt, but as a simple, tired fact. He shook his head. It doesn't seem to matter very much right now, does it? No, Julian whispered. Nothing. Another 30 minutes passed in that suffocating silence. Finally, the in-surgery light snapped off. The doors burst open. A doctor, his mask down his face, beaming with a weary smile, strode out. Mr. Salvatore, Damien stumbled forward, grabbing the doctor's arm. Yes, Elena. The baby. Are they? She's a champion, the doctor said, grinning. She's stable and heading to recovery. And you have a son. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. He gave us a real scare, but he's a fighter. Both are perfectly, beautifully fine. The relief that hit Damien was a physical force. He sagged against the wall, burying his face in his hands, and let out a sound, a strangled, breathless sob of pure joy. Julian felt it too. A wave of profound, selfish, exultant relief. He's alive, my son. He's alive. We're taking him to the nursery for observation. You can see him now. And Miss Hayes is being moved to recovery room 301, the doctor said before moving on. Damien, wiping his face, composed himself. The steel returned to his spine. The truce was over. He looked at Julian, his eyes once again cold and assessing. He said nothing. He simply turned and walked toward the nursery. Julian followed a shadow, a ghost. They stood at the large glass window. A nurse, smiling, rolled a small, clear bassinet into view. Taped to the front was a small white card. Baby boy Salvatore. The name was a punch, but then Julian saw him. He was tiny. He had a thatch of dark, wet hair. His face was red and scrunched, but he was perfect. As Julian watched, the baby's tiny starfish-sized hand waved in the air and he yawned. Julian's own hand came up, pressing against the cold glass mirroring his son's. A feeling he had never known, a deep, cellular, primal pull locked in his chest. It was his. That was his blood. That was his legacy. Julian's voice was thick, broken. He's beautiful. Yes, Damien said, his voice a blade of ice. He is. The moment was shattered by the sound of a gurney. A nurse was wheeling Elena out of the surgical bay. She was pale, her eyes closed, but she was smiling. Damien, she whispered, not opening her eyes. I'm here, my love, Damien said, rushing to her side, his voice softening instantly to a lover's murmur. He kissed her forehead, her cheek, her hand. I'm here. He's perfect, Elena. He's perfect. I want to see him, she whispered. Our son. Her eyes fluttered open. She saw Damien, and her face lit up with a love so profound it was almost blinding. Then her gaze drifted past Damien. She saw Julian, his hand pressed to the nursery glass. Her smile did not falter. Her face did not twist in anger. It simply closed. The light went out. She looked through him as if he were a pane of glass, a mildly annoying reflection. Then she turned her head, a simple, final, devastating act of dismissal, and looked only at Damien. Darling, she said, her voice weak but firm. Take me to our son. I'm tired. Of course, my love. Damien pushed her wheelchair toward a private recovery room, 301. He didn't look back. The door clicked shut, leaving Julian alone in the corridor, staring at the white wooden barrier. He had lost. The door opened one last time. Damien stepped out, closing it gently behind him. He walked until he was standing directly in front of Julian. She doesn't want to see you, Damien stated. He's my son. Julian hissed a desperate, pathetic plea. You saw him. He's mine. No. Damien said, his voice low and lethal. He's not yours. You were a biological component, a donor. You're not a father. A father is the man who sat with her through the morning sickness you caused and he cured. A father is the man who held her hand while she was terrified in that operating room. A father is the man who will teach him to ride a bike, who will be there for his first day of school, who will show him what it means to love a woman with respect. That will be me. I'll fight you, Julian stammered. Paternity, custody. You'll what Damien cut him off, his voice, devoid of all emotion. You'll fight me from a federal prison. You're a pauper. Your name is radioactive. By the time you get out, if you get out, my son will be in college. My lawyers will ensure you are nothing but a redacted line in a court document. You don't exist. Damien leaned in, the final fatal blow. You thought this was about a company. You thought this was about a baby. You are so small. This was about a life you threw away. You will have no part in it. Your legacy isn't that baby. Your legacy is an SEC filing. You are a footnote in your own son's story. Is that clear? Julian couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. He was utterly, finally broken. Good. Damien gave a single curt nod. He opened the door to room 301 and walked back to his fiancée, his family, and his son. The door clicked shut. Julian stood in the sterile, white corridor of the wing that bore his name. He could hear faintly through the door the sound of a baby crying, and then a woman's soft, soothing voice. The freeze he'd felt in Aurelia, that shock of seeing her, that was just a cold snap. This was the Ice Age. This was the reckoning. He was a ghost left to haunt the happiest day of his enemy's life. He had lost his company to his arrogance, his mistress to his cruelty, and his one true legacy, to a better man. He turned, and for the first time in his life, with not a single person in the world, watching Julian Thorne walked away. In the end, Julian Thorne learned the hardest lesson. You can't put a price on legacy, and you can't build an empire on a rotten foundation. He lost his company to his arrogance, his mistress to his cruelty, and his child to the man who understood something he never did. Love is the only asset that truly appreciates. He thought he was in a war for his company, but he was really in a war for his soul. And he'd already sold it. What do you think? Was this justice, or was it the ultimate revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were riveted by this story of power, betrayal, and consequence, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good drama, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more stories where the mighty don't just fall, they crash